All right, let's get straight to your frontline briefing. The conflict between the US, Israel, and Iran has just escalated in a way we haven't seen before. In just the last 24 hours, this has completely spilled out across the Persian Gulf, and the strategic impact is, well, it's staggering. We're talking about direct hits on critical global civilian hubs. At the same time, Tehran's own fuel infrastructure is literally burning under a sustained air campaign. And maybe most critically, the global energy market is, for all intents and purposes, paralyzed. Let's break down the intelligence.
This, right here, is the headline. This is the development that changes the entire game. I want you to really let that sink in. Not a military base, not a naval ship. A major international airport, one of the busiest transit hubs on the entire planet, was successfully hit and forced to shut down, even if just for a while. This is a massive, deliberate escalation. The targeting doctrine has shifted from purely military objectives to high-value economic and, frankly, psychological targets.
Okay, so first up, let's do a quick overview. We're going to cover the big top-line events. These are the core developments that really define the strategic picture as it stands right now. And these events are what set the stage for all the tactical and geopolitical chaos that's unfolding as we speak.
So let's really dig into this Dubai strike, because how it was done is just as important as what was done. Look at the specifics. The target wasn't the main terminal, it wasn't the runway, it was the fuel infrastructure next to the airport. Hitting a fuel tank like that is what we call a force multiplier. You create this huge disruptive fire that chokes the airport's operations and forces a shutdown, all without having to flatten the entire facility. This shows an incredibly sophisticated understanding of how to create maximum economic and psychological damage with minimal force. This is way beyond simple military targeting.
Now, at the very same time, the conventional air war against Iran itself is just relentless. It's not letting up. The focus continues to be on crippling Iran's ability to actually fight this war and direct its forces. So by hitting fuel depots, the goal is pretty obvious. You degrade their mobility. And by hammering command and control centers, the objective is to sever the head from the snake, to disrupt the IRGC's ability to coordinate these complex attacks like the one we just saw hit Dubai.
So let's look at the hard data here. When you break down this manifest, you start to see a very deliberate, very smart, multi-layered strategy taking shape. You see, for the UAE, Iran is using a high volume of cheap, very difficult to detect loitering munitions, suicide drones, specifically to go after economic targets. For Israel, they're using more traditional, more expensive ballistic missiles. Why? Well, it's likely twofold. Force Israel to use its multi-million-dollar interceptors, and at the same time, gather absolutely priceless performance data on those very systems. And then, in Iraq, you've got this low-level, persistent rocket fire from proxy forces, which just serves as a constant, low-cost headache for any U.S. assets in the area.
And this chart illustrates the tactical pivot perfectly. See, if you were just looking at the raw numbers, the total volume of projectiles, you might think, oh, Iran's capabilities are fading. The numbers are down from those initial big salvos a few days ago. But you'd be wrong. The impact of today's lower volume is significantly higher. It's like they've traded a shotgun for a sniper rifle. They're shifting from just mass fire to precision strikes on targets that really hurt. This is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of increased efficiency. It's an escalation in their economic warfare.
All right, time for our tactical deep dive. We've covered the what. Now let's get into the how and the why. We're going to analyze the actual mechanics of these strikes, unpack the information war that's raging, and look at the brutal reality on the other fronts of this widening conflict. So the multi-billion-dollar question: how did this drone get through a dense, multi-layered air defense network? Well, the IRGC is exploiting a known vulnerability, a known seam in the architecture. You see, systems like Patriot and THAAD, they're fantastic, but they're optimized to spot and kill high-flying, super-fast ballistic missiles. These Iranian drones, they're the opposite. They're likely launched from mobile platforms, maybe even small boats, and then they fly low and slow, hugging the terrain or the coastline, staying under the main radar curtain. They're basically crawling underneath the shield to go after soft, high-impact targets. This is a tactic that's been battle-tested by the Houthis against Saudi Arabia. But what we're seeing now is an execution with a much higher degree of coordination and against a far more sensitive global target.
And just in case anyone was thinking that the Dubai strike was a fluke, a lucky shot, it wasn't. This wasn't an isolated incident. A separate, more conventional missile attack actually hit a vehicle in Abu Dhabi, and we have confirmation of one fatality. This is crucial because it proves that even after thousands of Allied airstrikes trying to neutralize their launch sites, Iran can still project lethal force clear across the Gulf and get kinetic effects inside the capital of the UAE. Their offensive capability is still very much intact.
And then came this, an official warning from the IRGC. This statement moves things beyond military or even dual-use targets. This is a direct, crystal-clear threat against purely civilian economic assets, and they're specifically targeting them based on ownership. This expands the battlefield in a terrifying way. It puts every single American-affiliated company in the entire region directly in the crosshairs. It's a calculated attempt to use fear to force an economic retreat from the Gulf.
This brings us to the information war, and frankly, the picture is getting incredibly murky. On one side, you have CENTCOM press releases reporting overwhelming success. Thousands of strikes, huge percentages of Iranian hardware destroyed. But when you put those claims right next to the verified, on-the-ground actions of the last 24 hours, there's a huge disconnect. Iran is still getting drones through advanced air defenses, they're still landing lethal missiles, and they're still launching enough ballistic missiles to consistently test Israel's Iron Dome and Arrow systems. The takeaway here is that while the Pentagon's numbers on static sites destroyed might be accurate, Iran's mobile and asymmetric launch capabilities are clearly still very, very effective.
Now, while all eyes are fixed on the Gulf, we have to look north because that front is absolutely exploding. Israel is no longer just containing Hezbollah, they are actively escalating. We're seeing much heavier bombing of Beirut itself and a significant ground push north of the Litani River. That's a clear signal they're trying to carve out a much deeper buffer zone. Naturally, this has locked Hezbollah into a cycle of intense retaliatory rocket fire into northern Israel. And the humanitarian cost, it's catastrophic. We're now looking at over 1 million displaced civilians in a country that was already on the absolute brink of total collapse.
This right here, this is the core concept. This is the playbook for the entire conflict. It is a masterclass in asymmetric warfare. Look, Iran knows it cannot win a straight-up conventional fight against the US and Israel. It doesn't even have to try. Its entire strategy is built on making the defense so incredibly expensive that it just becomes unsustainable. Think about it. Every single time a $2 million Patriot interceptor is fired to shoot down a drone that costs maybe $10,000, Iran scores a huge strategic and economic victory. The goal is to simply drain the adversary's limited high-tech arsenal by drowning it in a sea of cheap, mass-produced threats.
Meanwhile, inside Iran itself, a brutal, hidden war is raging. While the skies are full of jets and missiles, the ground is crawling with intelligence operatives. Iranian state media is blasting reports of mass arrests, hundreds of citizens accused of being spies, of feeding targeting coordinates, or confirming bomb damage for the allies. This points to a deep, deep paranoia inside the regime. And at the same time, the US and Israel are relentlessly pushing their decapitation strategy, hunting high-ranking IRGC commanders to try and disrupt the very command structure that is orchestrating all of these asymmetric attacks.
And amidst all of this tactical and strategic analysis, we can't lose sight of the staggering human cost. The Iranian Red Crescent is now reporting that over 1,300 people have been killed inside Iran. Now, this number likely doesn't even include uniformed military casualties, but it gives us a very grim, very sober baseline for the civilian toll of this air campaign.
Okay, finally, let's zoom out and look at the global fallout. Because the shockwaves from the last 24 hours are extending far beyond the Middle East. They are hitting global markets and fracturing diplomatic alliances in real time. This is Iran's strategic checkmate. They have successfully weaponized geography. The Iranian foreign minister has declared the Strait of Hormuz, the waterway through which a massive chunk of the world's oil flows every single day, is now closed to the United States and any nation allied with it. This is a surgical closure designed to punish Washington and its partners by holding the entire global economy hostage in a way we really haven't seen since the tanker wars of the 1980s.
And the economic bleeding started instantly. Brent crude oil is locked in above $100 a barrel, and honestly, there's no ceiling in sight. But this isn't just about what you pay at the pump. This paralyzes global shipping, it sends inflation skyrocketing, it grinds critical supply chains to a halt, and to make it all worse, the IRGC has now directly threatened to destroy the oil fields and refineries of any regional company that cooperates with the US. They're basically demanding economic allegiance at gunpoint.
So, faced with this economic warfare, Washington's diplomatic countermove has just hit a solid brick wall. The U.S. demanded that its allies send warships to help force the strait back open. The response? A swift and pretty much unanimous no. Germany has already stated this is not a NATO issue. Japan and the UK, nations that heavily rely on that waterway, have officially declined, terrified of being dragged into a wider, uncontrollable war. And at the same exact time, Iran's foreign minister has slammed the door shut on any talks, flatly stating they are seeking neither a truce nor negotiations.
So the most important point is this. We are in a state of total diplomatic failure. There is no off-ramp. Both sides are completely locked into their positions, and neither one shows any sign of blinking. The path of negotiation is closed. The only path that remains open right now is continued military escalation.
If you need to continue receiving these raw intelligence breakdowns, make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on. And your own analysis in the comments section is a valuable part of this whole picture. Trust me, we read all of it.
And this slide really just lays out the strategic deadlock perfectly. The stated U.S. war aim is the permanent dismantlement of Iran's nuclear and unconventional warfare capabilities. That's a goal that basically implies total, unconditional victory. Iran's position is just as absolute. No truce, no talks, only continued asymmetric attacks. These two positions are mutually exclusive. They are completely irreconcilable.
So, to summarize, this conflict is not winding down, it's metastasizing. The geographic scope is wider, the targeting is far more economically damaging, and the secondary fronts, like Lebanon, are becoming major conflicts in their own right. The front line is hot, and the trajectory is pointing in one direction only: further escalation.
And all of this brings us to the final and most critical question. When both sides have completely rejected diplomacy, when escalation is the only policy left on the table for everyone, and when the stated war aims are absolute and uncompromising, what is the strategic endgame? What does winning even look like for either side at this point? And what is the cost going to be to the region and to the world? That is the question we will continue to track. We'll see you for the next briefing.